Hi guys, it's Alice, and today it is time to talk about the books I read in the first part of March. The first book that I read was This Is Going to Hurt by Adam Kay. This is a memoir, and it's about the author's experience of working as a junior doctor in the UK. And he worked as that for 6 years before he eventually left because of a devastating experience that he had. And this book is sort of a combination of the diary he kept while he was working and thoughts on that time and those experiences. This book is like a weird combination of being funny, gross, and heartbreaking all at the same time. And it's the kind of book that I feel is very easy to sort of get addicted to, and when I had started this, I really didn't want to put it down. It has a lot of humor in it, but also a lot of interesting and sometimes slightly unpleasant bits, and then there are parts that are really sad and difficult to read, and I feel like it must be very difficult to write this kind of book and balance all of those things well, but I feel like this does that. I feel like throughout this book you get a lot of insight into the intensity of this type of work, and you get to see both the joys of it and the struggles of it. So we get to see happy moments, but we also get to see the dark side where people are severely overworked and underpaid, and we get to see the consequences that doing this type of work can have on people and their mental health and just their health in general, and how anyone does this type of work over any long period of time is amazing. I also like how this book focuses on the importance of healthcare and of having a healthcare system that works, which it often doesn't. And I also have to point out that the footnotes in this book are amazing. There is a lot of medical terms in here, and there are footnotes to sort of explain those things, but they're written in a really funny way, and I feel like actually the funniest bits in here are in the footnotes. I will say though, I did feel like the end of this came about very abruptly, and I kind of felt like there was something missing at the end, but otherwise this was an excellent read, and I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. I would definitely recommend it. Just bear in mind that there are a lot of parts in here that are quite graphic and they're very gross, so just bear that in mind. Secondly, I read No One Is Too Small to Make a Difference by Greta Thunberg. This is a nonfiction book, and it's a collection of speeches made by Greta, who, if somehow you don't know, she is a climate activist. This is quite a short and little book, as I'm sure you can see, and it is exactly what it says it's going to be, and I really enjoyed it, mostly because I think Greta is a really inspirational person, and I think the work she's trying to do is incredibly important and interesting. So I've heard a lot of these speeches when she actually made them, and it was interesting to sort of read through them and sort of pause and reflect on the things that she's saying, but I do think that they are more impactful when you actually listen to them, and when you read them sort of back to back like in this book, they do get understandably a little bit repetitive. I think this is definitely worth reading though, and I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars, and I really hope that she comes out with more literature in the future, especially if it was in longer format, because I would love to read about her life and her experiences, although I imagine she's maybe a little too busy trying to make the world not burn to a crisp. Second to last, I finished Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng. This is contemporary fiction, and it's set in this place called Shaker Heights, which is an immaculate and carefully planned suburb of Cleveland. And here we meet the Richardsons, who decide to let their rental home to a single mother and her teenage daughter. And as these families' lives become more and more entangled, resentment and secrets start coming out with devastating consequences. So, I loved this book. It's my favorite novel that I've read all year. This is a book very much about the characters, and it's filled to the brim with fascinating people, and they feel well crafted and real. And I especially loved reading about the mothers in the story and their different ways of thinking and handling different situations, and reading about their relationships with their daughters was so interesting. And you feel like you really get into everybody's head and you feel like you really get to know them. I just felt like there was a lot of emotion and thought that went into these characters, and I feel like they're gonna stick with me for a long time. And the story has a lot of elements to it, but it never felt messy to me. It just sort of felt like real life. And having this setting was really interesting because you have this backdrop of everything being immaculate and perfectly planned, and I thought that was really interesting. There are a lot of secrets and surprises along the way, but it never feels cheap or overdone. But I gotta say, the characters really are what makes this book, and it's what made me want to keep reading. And what I think is really interesting is that throughout this book, all of these different situations appear, and you have all of these different conversations, and because you get to know the characters so well, you understand where they're coming from when they disagree with one another, and you can see both sides of the story even if you don't actually agree with them. I don't know how much sense that makes, but I feel like the book doesn't really make you want to root for a particular character. They all have like good and bad sides. It is kind of a slow burn of a book in a lot of ways, but I feel like that worked well because it gave space for the building of these complex and complicated characters, and that is, like I said, what makes this an excellent novel. And it explores womanhood and motherhood and morality in a really compelling and well-written way. And I honestly feel like the author nailed everything with this, so I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. Lastly, I finished Gin Patrol on the Purple Line by Deepa Anapara. This is contemporary fiction, and it was sent to me by the publishers, which is why it looks like this. And the story unfolds in a slum on the outskirts of an unnamed Indian city, and we meet this 9-year-old boy who loves detective shows, and he tries to become a little bit of a detective himself when kids in the area where he lives start disappearing. This was a really interesting book, and I'm glad I read it, and there are some parts of this that are excellent and some parts that are maybe a little less so. There are a lot of fantastic things about this book. The characters, especially the main character and his friends, felt well-rounded, and I loved getting to know them, and seeing this world through their eyes was really interesting. I also think the setting of this is amazingly well captured, and seeing this place and all the people living in it and seeing them go about their everyday lives and sort of getting to know their struggles but also their joys was just amazing. The story itself is inspired by the fact that 180 children go missing in India every single day, and I really applaud this book for shining a light on that because I did not know that. And we get to see how these disappearances affect these families and this community, and seeing that through the eyes of a 9-year-old boy was really interesting. Even though all of that is great, there are some things that I didn't like about this. Like, I think the story gets incredibly repetitive, and there's a good chunk in here where I really didn't feel engaged by the story, and that made this book feel kind of long and dragged out. The strengths of this book are its characters and its setting, and I think it's worth reading just for that, and I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. But I will say, if you're the kind of reader where plot is really important to you, this might not be for you. And also, I've seen some people call this like a mystery thriller, and I really wouldn't call it that at all. So those are all the books that I finished, but I'm currently reading Woven in Moonlight by Isabel Ibanez, and this is a YA novel inspired by Bolivian culture and history, so I'm really excited to keep reading this. And I imagine I'm gonna have quite a lot of time to read these next few weeks because I don't know if you've heard, but Norway is kind of in lockdown right now because of the COVID-19 virus. So I don't really know if I'm gonna work at all, and if I am, it's just gonna be a little bit. So that's gonna be interesting. it's an interesting time to sort of be alive. Okay guys, those were all the books that I had to talk about today, and I would of course, as always, love to know what you guys have been reading lately, and I would also love to know how you're all doing, because I know that these times are a little scary and there's a lot going on, and I really hope you're all taking care of yourselves and that you're doing well, and I will see you soon. Bye.